In the forgotten wilderness, somewhere between the fertile Nile valleys and some promised unknown land to the east, two young goats stand before a man dressed in linen. A strange menagerie, if ever you've seen one. All three stare into the gaping darkness of a large structure. What is this thing, anyway? Maybe a tent, maybe a makeshift meeting house or some second-rate temple rising defiantly from the surrounding nothingness. Regardless, there they stand, two goats and a man, gazing silently into a void. It feels as if they have always stood here. Through the opening, a fine mist spills out, carrying with it the sharp smells of freshly carved wood and fragrant dye. The silence falls away with a sudden bleat. One goat struggles against its leash. The man drives ravenous hands into a container before recoiling with equally great speed. He lifts his hands high above his head. In one hand, a golden lot inscribed with the word Ladonai. In the other, a lot for Azazel. Their fate is sealed. A silk crimson thread is tied to the opening of the structure. A second thread to the goat for Azazel. The goats are separated, one bound for a short, certain journey to death on the altar, the other to a long journey into the unknown. Achrei Mot is a parsha of death and anxiety-inducing precision. It begins almost casually with its reference to the deaths of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, before quickly turning to the serious business of ritual slaughter, Yom Kippur, moral prohibitions, and their attendant consequences if not observed. Maybe under other circumstances, I would set out to dazzle you with closely reasoned insights on the legal sections of this text, leaping between the parsha, Gemara, Midrash, and codes while drawing out unfathomed lessons that would make you say, my goodness, we must have this young rabbi as a scholar in residence at our synagogue. But truth be told, that isn't me. Or to be more precise, in this moment, with this parsha, that isn't me. It's not that I am wholly uninterested in the specificity surrounding ritual slaughter. Rather, it is that in preparing for this moment, I could not remove my mind from the arresting image and idea of the goats, and specifically the goat for Azazel. The ritual process for sending the goat to Azazel is remarkably intimate, involving hands, sins, and confession. V'samach Aaron et shtei yadav al rosh hasa'ir achai v'hitvada alav et kol avonot bnei Yisrael ve'et kol pisheihem lechol chatotam v'natan otam al rosh hasa'ir. Aaron would put his hands on the head of this live goat designated for Azazel and confess all the iniquities, transgressions, and sins of the Israelites before sending it away into the wilderness by way of a shaliach. The text goes through pains to make sure we know that both hands are placed on the head of this goat by reiterating that fact at the beginning and the end of the verse. For Ibn Ezra, this intentional act of transferal was a symbolic distancing from sin, or as he puts it, Ke'ilu natunim hem el rosh hasa'ir veholechim el makom shelo yizkaru od. These sins were taken to a place where it was as if they would no longer be remembered. It is a luxury to forget. And apparently, it is a ritual necessity to send these sins away on the head of this animal. But whereas this symbolic distancing might be a kind of psychic relief for our forebears, I can't help but wrestle with the symbolic yoke that this goat must carry walking into the wilderness laden with sins. Goats, as a species, are social animals. While they do not huddle together quite as closely or as consistently as sheep, studies have shown that they are prosocial, and when domesticated, they can solicit the approval of humans. This image of the friendly goat and the knowledge that it is being led to a place where it will be left alone in ecological desolation, social isolation, all while carrying our ancestors' sins, is harrowing. And if I'm being honest, I'm not sure it makes much sense. Why would Adonai command this? In Masechet Yoma, the sages seem irked by a real or imagined host of non-Jews who ask questions similar to the one I'm asking. As a result, the rabbis cleverly construct an exegetical yarn whereby many unjustified mitzvot, like not eating pork, or shatnez, or chalitza, or taharat matzora, and the scapegoat are simply decreed statuses which should not be questioned. Also, for those who did not get everything I was referencing in that list, don't worry, you are not missing much. Truly. The point that Chazal is making is that there are mitzvot that will never make sense. Still, we must do them. I can appreciate the close exegesis of the sages and the way they shore up these mitzvot. Maybe I could even craft an argument about the limits of human knowledge and the value of trusting Adonai despite such limits. But as Ramban makes it clear, this goat is neither offered up to Adonai, nor does it belong to Adonai. So constructing an argument about trusting Adonai with a confounding mitzvah for an animal that does not even belong to Adonai, that is a stretch for me. Many of our sages speculate on what happens once this goat reaches the wilderness. But I suspect there is a truth that this goat knows, a truth that the Israelites and our sages will never know. We move forward hundreds of years. The makeshift tent of meeting of yesteryear has been replaced by a resplendent temple. For this temple and its surrounding promised land, wars have been waged, kingdoms and rulers have been felled, and endless blood and guts have been burned upon an altar. Nevertheless, the ritual repeats itself again. 2 goats, 2 lots, 1 long journey into the wilderness. Now, far beyond the outskirts of the city, this goat for Azazel and the Shaliach inch forward under a menacing sun, just like so many goats and shlichim have done before them. The scattered shrubs offer no relief, only a reminder of how remote this land is. As if by surprise, the Shaliach and the goat approach an overlook where the land falls away. They move closer to the edge. The crags below the plateau reach up greedily, and the human drops the rope binding the goat and stands incredibly still. What will happen? Before the goat can let out a nervous cry, the Shaliach turns and scuttles away with incredible speed. The goat does not follow. It just looks, head cocked curiously to the side, wondering. Where does a goat sacrificed to chance go when it has reached the end of the land? To Azazel? There is a remarkable range of ancient opinions surrounding Azazel. In the pseudepigraphic book of Enoch, Azazel is figured as a fallen angel who taught humanity the ways and weapons of destruction and sin. For Ramban, Azazel is identified with the fallen angel Samael. For other sages, however, placing a fallen angel opposite Adonai in a liturgical ritual raises far too many theological red flags. So they declare that the real meaning is contained in the word Azazel itself. For Rashi and Saadia Gaon, Azazel refers to a rugged or mighty, Oz for Az, mountain of God, El. To commentators like Ibn Ezra, the word is a Hebrew-Aramaic compound, Ez-Azal, which translates to the goat went. An elegantly simple explanation. But all this parsing of words intensifies the more essential question. What will happen to this goat? Is it pushed off a cliff to a certain death like the Talmud asserts? Is some more intimate and violent ritual performed by the Shaliach and it's simply not recorded? Or is it just released? Though only a projection of my imagination, I see the goat standing there. I know this goat. I understand this alienation. Maybe many of us do. For me, the peculiarities of my alienation are thus. In college, I left the religious rites and folkways of my birth, deciding to trek through the very terrain that would mark my becoming a Jew. The longer the journey, the more isolating it has become. Invasive questions, personal compromises, spiritual gymnastics, carrying the weighted curiosities of individuals and communities on my shoulders, all in order to show myself not simply a Jew, but a good Jew. My adulthood has been constructed by a series of chance encounters, wild meandering, and contingent decisions. Now that I find myself here with you all, gazing over a strange collection of titles and identifiers. Almost rabbi, black rabbi, a first for this seminary, a role model. But what do I see beyond that? Last Yom Kippur, or maybe Rosh Hashanah, I can't quite remember, I found myself spiritually inconsolable and wandering the streets of Brooklyn for hours. A fairly typical activity for Brooklyn millennials, by the way. I started at Franklin Avenue, ventured over to Union Street, took Union all the way over to Columbia, where I then hung a right and walked until I found myself sitting on an immaculately green, manicured hill in Brooklyn Bridge Park, looking out over the East River. With less than a year left till ordination, I was puzzled over how I had arrived here. I wasn't worried about work. That part seemed clear enough. Rather, I had lost the thread of my story. I had lost track of my why. It didn't make coherent sense anymore. I imagined myself sharing a kind of confused existential space with this scapegoat, asking, did I belong to Adonai anymore? Did I belong to Azazel? Something else? Here we were, me and this mythic goat, on one of the holiest days of the year, peering into the wilderness alone. Where would we go? My brilliant friend, sister, and muse, the artist Rebecca Samanga Frank, who's right over there, proposed last Yom Kippur that it's possible that those scapegoats who get released every year might find one another out there in the wilderness. Maybe they start new lives, creating herds, and maybe some of these goats would be able to separate themselves from the sins infused into them. It's a beautiful thought, no? Finding community in the periphery, releasing the metaphoric sins that burden you, encountering other goats who took the journey from the temple into the wilderness. In such communities, there wouldn't be the pressure to make meaning of your experience or sacrifice your story upon an altar of curiosity. Instead, there would be the simple, profound experience of being with a community that understands. So fast forward to today. What do I imagine for this goat? This lone animal standing confused at the cliff's edge, deep in the wilderness. I imagine, in the middle distance, it seems as if the rocks are moving. The vague outline of trees and diffuse shrubs peek through shimmering waves of heat. Is this real? It must be a mirage. Suddenly, one of the rocks rumbles violently before letting out a lone cry. The echoing valley distorts the sound. Maybe it's the cry of another goat, maybe not. What is certain, however, is that these rocks are not rocks. They are alive, there are many of them, and they are moving. The goat lets out a cry of its own. The rocks continue to move. Finally resolved, the goat squares its shoulders, sets its feet, and begins the long descent into the valley below, eager to join whatever herd has made its home there, deep in the wilderness. Kaddish D'Rabbanan. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, ba'alama divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayachon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru, amen. Yehi shemei Rabbah mevarach le'olam amen. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitwamam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudesha, b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechemata da miran be'alma v'imru, Al Yisrael, ve'al Rabbanan, ve'al Talmidehon, ve'al kol Talmidei Talmidehon, ve'al kol man de'askin be'oraita, diva tra hadein, ve'div b'chol atar va'atar, yehei lehon ulechon shlama rabba, china v'chista v'rachamin, V'chayin arichin u'mezonei revichei ufurkana min kodam avuhon divi shemaya b'imru. Amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim alenu ve'al kol Yisrael b'imru. Osei shalom b'mromav hu berachamav yasei shalom alenu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel b'imru. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you to my team, especially right here up front. So much love to you all. Thanks to friends who are online in the Zoom, and Yom Tov, everyone.